When Wade Mercer walked past 9 beautiful women and stopped in front of the dirtiest, oldest stranger at the end of the line, the entire town of Black Hollow thought he'd lost his mind. Clara Bennett wasn't there for love. She was there for a free ride west and 3 weeks of shelter before disappearing forever. She told him that to his face. He chose her anyway. What happened next tore through this frontier town like wildfire, tested them both through the coldest winter anyone could remember, and proved that sometimes the most unlikely choice becomes the only one that matters. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The morning stage arrived in Black Hollow 3 hours late, covered in dust that turned the painted wood the color of old bones. Wade Mercer stood outside Patterson's trading post with his hat in his hands, watching 10 women climb down from the coach into the sharp April sunlight. They looked tired. They looked hopeful. They looked like they'd spent 2 weeks imagining what kind of man would pay the Westward Marriage Agency $500 to arrange this spectacle. Wade knew what they saw when they looked at him. 42 years old, weathered face, broad shoulders that came from hauling fence posts and wrestling cattle, not from sitting behind a desk counting money. He owned the largest ranch within 50 miles, ran 200 head of cattle, and employed 6 full-time hands. By frontier standards, he was wealthy. By his own standards, he was just tired. The women formed a nervous line along the trading post's covered walkway. Wade could feel the entire town gathering behind him, pretending to conduct business while watching the show. Sam Patterson stood in his doorway with arms crossed, grinning like he'd organized a carnival. Mayor Hendricks positioned himself near the water trough, nodding with approval. Even Martha Calhoun, who ran the boarding house and usually minded her own business, had found a reason to sweep the same patch of porch she'd already swept twice. Wade hated every second of it. "Mr. Mercer," the stage driver called out, climbing down with a leather portfolio. "Got your ladies here, safe and sound. Well, 9 of them anyway. Lost one in Omaha. Changed her mind." "Smart woman," Wade muttered. The driver didn't hear him. He was already unloading trunks and hat boxes, chattering about road conditions and broken axles and a snake that had spooked the horses outside Julesburg. Wade wasn't listening. He was looking at the women, really looking at them, and feeling something cold settle in his chest. They were all so young. The first woman couldn't have been more than 19. Pretty face, blue dress with lace collar, hands folded carefully in front of her. She smiled when Wade's eyes passed over her. Practice smile. The kind that said she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. The second woman was blonde, maybe 22, wearing a traveling suit that probably cost more than Wade paid his ranch hands in a month. She looked nervous but determined, like she'd made a bet with herself and refused to lose. The third, fourth, fifth, they all blurred together. Young faces, hopeful eyes, dresses that didn't belong on a frontier settlement where mud ran ankle-deep after rain, and the nearest proper church was 30 miles south. Wade felt suddenly, overwhelmingly exhausted. He shouldn't have done this. Shouldn't have let Sam Patterson talk him into contacting the agency after one too many whiskeys at the saloon. Shouldn't have written that letter describing his ranch, his situation, his need for a wife who could handle hard work and harder winters. Shouldn't have sent $500 he could have spent on breeding stock or new equipment, but he had done it. And now 10 women were standing in front of him, waiting. 9 women, he corrected himself. 9. Because at the very end of the line, barely visible in the shadow of the trading post's overhang, stood someone who didn't quite fit. Wade's eyes stopped there. The woman was older than the others, mid-30s, maybe older, with dark hair pulled back in a style that had given up trying to be fashionable about 100 miles ago. Her dress was brown, torn at the hem, and carried stains that spoke of travel, weather, and absolutely zero concern for first impressions. Her boots were men's boots, scuffed and muddy. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't standing up straight. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Wade felt something shift in his chest. He started walking. The first woman's smile brightened as he approached. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Elizabeth Carr." Wade walked past her. The second woman stepped forward slightly. "Sir, I've come all the way from—" Wade kept walking. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. The women exchanged glances. Mayor Hendricks frowned. Sam Patterson's grin faltered. Wade walked the entire length of the line without stopping, past every hopeful face, every practiced smile, every carefully chosen dress. When he reached the end, he stopped in front of the woman in the torn brown dress. Up close, he could see she had green eyes, tired eyes, eyes that had seen enough to stop expecting anything good. "You don't want to be here," Wade said quietly. The woman blinked. For a moment, she looked like she might lie. Then something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "No," she answered. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much lately. "No, I don't." Wade nodded once. He turned back toward the crowd, toward the confused faces and whispered questions. "I'll take this one," he said. The silence that followed was total. Sam Patterson's mouth fell open. Mayor Hendricks actually took a step forward, like he was going to object. The 9 other women stared in collective shock. Even the horses tied to the hitching post seemed to pause in their fidgeting. Wade ignored them all. He looked back at the woman in the brown dress. "Name's Wade Mercer. I own a cattle ranch 12 miles north. House is solid, work is hard, winters are brutal. I'm offering marriage, not rescue. If you can't handle that, say so now." The woman studied him for a long moment. Wade could see her weighing options, calculating odds. This close, he noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way her dress hung loose like she'd lost weight recently, the careful way she held herself, like someone used to trouble. "Clara Bennett," she finally said. "And I should probably tell you I only signed with the agency for free travel and temporary shelter. I was planning to disappear in 3 weeks." Behind Wade, someone gasped. It might have been Martha Calhoun. Wade didn't turn around. "Appreciate the honesty. I've never run a ranch house. I don't cook fancy meals. I'm not good at pretending to be something I'm not." Clara's eyes didn't waver. "You should probably pick one of them." "Probably," Wade agreed. "But I'm not." "Why?" "Because you're the only one not lying." Clara's expression flickered with something Wade couldn't quite name. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition. "Your horse or the stage?" she asked. "Got a wagon. Your trunk?" "Don't have a trunk. This is everything." Clara gestured at herself, at the muddy boots and torn dress. Wade nodded. "Wagon's behind the livery. I need to settle with the driver, pick up supplies. 20 minutes. I'll be there." Wade started to turn away, then stopped. "Miss Bennett?" "Clara." "Clara, you change your mind in those 20 minutes. That's fine. No obligation. But if you get in that wagon, I expect you to at least give it an honest try." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Same goes for you." Wade almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat and walked back through the stunned crowd toward the stage driver, who was still standing there with the leather portfolio hanging forgotten in his hand. Sam Patterson caught Wade's arm as he passed. "Wade, what in the hell? Not now, Sam. That woman just told you she's planning to run off." "I heard her. She's older than Wade. Did you look at the others? Elizabeth Carr's father owns a textile mill. Sarah Jensen has teaching credentials. That blonde girl studied music in..." Wade pulled his arm free. "I made my choice." "This is insane." "Maybe." Wade kept walking. "But it's my insanity. My money. My ranch." He paid the driver, collected the paperwork that certified Clara Bennett had arrived in good health and of sound mind, though the driver's expression suggested he had doubts about Wade's sound mind, and headed toward Patterson's store to collect the supplies he'd ordered. Behind him, he could hear the murmur of conversation rising like floodwater. Inside the trading post, Sam was already spreading the news. Wade ignored the stares and pointed questions, loaded flour, sugar, coffee, and lamp oil into a crate, and carried it out to where he'd left the wagon behind the livery stable. Clara was already there. She stood beside the wagon with her arms crossed, looking at the 2 draft horses like she was evaluating their quality. When Wade approached, she didn't turn around. "Town thinks you're crazy," she said. "Town thinks a lot of things." Wade loaded the supply crate into the wagon bed. "Most of them wrong." "They think I'm running a con." "Are you?" Clara finally turned to face him. "Not a very good one if I told you my plan up front." "That's what I figured." Wade moved to the wagon seat and climbed up. "You coming or not?" Clara hesitated. For a moment, Wade thought she might actually walk away. Instead, she grabbed the side of the wagon and pulled herself up with surprising strength, settling onto the bench beside him without waiting for help. Wade released the brake and snapped the reins. The horses started forward, pulling the wagon out from behind the livery and onto Black Hollow's main street. The entire town was still there. They lined both sides of the street like spectators at a hanging. Wade could feel their eyes, their judgment, their absolute certainty that he'd made a terrible mistake. Elizabeth Carr stood near the trading post with tears running down her face. The blonde woman, Sarah Jensen, Sam had called her, looked angry. The others just looked confused. Clara sat perfectly still beside him, staring straight ahead. If she felt the weight of those stares, she didn't show it. Wade kept the horses moving at a steady pace. Didn't hurry, didn't slow down. Just drove straight through town while Black Hollow watched and wondered what the hell Wade Mercer was thinking. They were half a mile past the last building when Clara finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" "Choose me. I gave you an out. Told you I wasn't staying." Wade kept his eyes on the road. "You also told me the truth. That counts for something. Does it?" "More than you'd think." They rode in silence for a while. The road stretched ahead through rolling grassland dotted with sage and the occasional juniper. Spring had painted everything green, though Wade knew it wouldn't last. By August, this land would be brown and hard, baked by a sun that never seemed to set. "The others were prettier," Clara said eventually. "Younger, better dressed. Any one of them would have said yes." "I know." "So why me?" Wade took his time answering. He'd been asking himself the same question since the moment he'd seen her standing at the end of that line. "You weren't pretending," he said finally. "Everyone else was playing a part. Perfect wife, proper lady, whatever they thought I wanted to see. But you," he glanced at her, "you looked like you'd already survived something hard and came out the other side. I respect that." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "What I survived isn't something you want in your house. Wasn't asking for your history, just your honesty. You might regret that." "Might," Wade agreed. "But I've had enough of lies and performance to last a lifetime. I'd rather have someone real who runs off in 3 weeks than someone fake who stays forever." Clara turned to look at him fully for the first time. Wade kept his eyes on the road, but he could feel her gaze like physical weight. "You talk like someone who's been burned before," she said. "Everyone gets burned eventually." "That's not an answer." "No," Wade said. "It's not." They rode the rest of the way in silence. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a collection of buildings arranged in a rough square around a central yard. Main house built from logs and stone, barn large enough for 20 horses, bunkhouse for the hands, several smaller outbuildings for equipment and storage. Fences stretched in every direction, marking pastures where cattle grazed in scattered groups. It was practical, functional. Nothing fancy, but solid. Built to last. Clara studied it all with an expression Wade couldn't read. "You run this yourself?" she asked. "Got 6 hands, 3 full-time, 3 seasonal. Most of them are out with the herd right now." Wade guided the horses toward the house. "Place is bigger than it looks. Previous owner had plans to expand, died before he could finish." "Previous owner?" "My wife's father." Wade pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "She inherited it when he passed. I inherited it when she did." Clara didn't ask the obvious question. Wade was grateful. He climbed down from the wagon and started unloading supplies. Clara jumped down without waiting for help and grabbed the other end of the flour sack before Wade could tell her not to. "Where?" she asked. "Kitchen's through the front door, first room on the left." They carried supplies in silence. The house was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Well-built, well-maintained, and completely impersonal. Functional furniture, clean floors, everything in its place. It looked like a house where someone lived, but nobody felt at home. Clara noticed. Wade could tell by the way her eyes moved over the empty walls, the bare mantel, the kitchen that held cookware but no personal touches. "You eat your meals here or with the hands?" she asked, setting down the flour. "Depends on the day. Usually here." "Who cooks?" "I do. Nothing fancy." Clara looked around the kitchen, taking inventory. "When's the last time anyone cleaned out these cabinets?" Wade had to think about it. "Not sure." "You got rats?" "Not inside. Barn cats keep them down." Clara opened one of the cabinets and peered inside. Wade could see her cataloging problems: dust, disorganization, supplies stored wrong. She closed it and opened another. Same expression. I'll need to know where everything is, she said. Food stores, tools, livestock schedule. Can't run a house blind. Wade felt something uncertain move in his chest. Thought you weren't staying. Clara turned to look at him. I'm not. But I'm here for 3 weeks, and I don't do things halfway. If I'm staying in your house, eating your food, I'm going to earn it. That was always the plan. The agency didn't tell you that you'd be expected to. I know what they told me. I also know I don't take charity. Clara's voice was firm. 3 weeks. I'll work for my keep, then I'm gone. That's the deal. Wade studied her. She had met his eyes without flinching, without apologizing. Everything about her stance said she meant exactly what she said. No more, no less. All right, Wade said. I can work with that. Good. Clara looked back at the cabinets. I'll start here tomorrow. Where do I sleep? Wade led her upstairs. The second floor had 4 bedrooms, 1 master, 3 smaller. He opened the door to one of the smaller rooms. Clean bed, simple furniture, window facing east. This work? He asked. Clara looked around the room. It's fine. Anything you need? Let me know. I won't need anything. Wade nodded and started to leave. He stopped in the doorway. Clara? She turned. Thank you, Wade said, for being honest. About everything. Clara's expression softened slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. Don't thank me yet. You might still regret this. Might, Wade agreed, but at least I'll know where I stand. He left her there and went back downstairs. Through the window, he could see 2 of his ranch hands riding in from the north pasture. They'd see the wagon. They'd ask questions. Wade would have to explain that he'd chosen a wife from the agency lineup, and that wife had already told him she was planning to leave. This was going to be a long 3 weeks. But as Wade stepped out onto the porch and watched the sun drop toward the western horizon, painting the grassland gold and orange, he found he didn't regret his choice. He'd chosen the truth over the performance, the real over the polished. Whatever happened next, at least it would be honest. And after 3 years of living in a house full of ghosts and memories, honesty felt like something worth having, even if it only lasted 3 weeks. Wade's ranch hands took the news about as well as the town had. You picked who? Jack Morrison, the head hand, stared at Wade like he'd announced plans to sell the ranch and move to San Francisco. The one in the muddy boots? That's the one. They were standing in the barn, checking on a mare that had thrown a shoe that afternoon. Jack held the lantern while Wade examined the hoof, but neither of them was really paying attention to the horse anymore. Boss, I don't mean to overstep. Then don't. But did you actually look at the other women? Because Jimmy rode into town for supplies this morning, and he said there were some real pretty... I saw them. Wade set the mare's hoof down and straightened. Made my choice. We moving on, or you got more observations to share? Jack opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. She's really planning to run off? That's what she said. And you still chose her. I did. Jack shook his head slowly. You know the whole town's going to be talking about this for months. Let them talk. Wade moved to the next stall. They'll find something else to gossip about eventually. Boss? Jack followed him. I'm just saying if you needed a wife for practical reasons, someone to cook, keep house, that sort of thing, you could have picked someone who actually wanted to stay. Wade stopped. He turned to face Jack directly. You been married, Jack? No, sir. Ever lived with someone who was pretending to be happy while dying inside? Jack shifted uncomfortably. Can't say I have. It's worse than being alone. Wade's voice was quiet but firm. I'd rather have someone honest for 3 weeks than someone miserable for 30 years. We clear? Jack nodded slowly. Clear. Good. Mare needs a new shoe. Can you handle it, or should I call Stevens? I'll handle it. Wade left the barn and walked back toward the house. Full dark had fallen while they'd been talking, and lamplight glowed in one of the upstairs windows. Clara's window. She was still awake. Wade wondered what she was thinking, whether she regretted getting in the wagon, whether she was already planning her escape route. He went inside, lit a lamp in the kitchen, and started making coffee. The house was quiet except for the creak of floorboards overhead, Clara moving around, getting settled. Wade poured coffee and sat at the kitchen table. He should eat something, but he wasn't hungry. Should go to bed, but he wasn't tired. Instead, he sat there in the lamplight and thought about the choice he'd made. Everyone thought he was crazy. Maybe they were right, but when he'd seen Clara standing at the end of that line, tired, honest, not trying to be anything she wasn't, something in him had recognized something in her. Loneliness. Not the temporary loneliness of travel or transition. The deep kind. The kind that came from surviving things that changed you, that left you standing in crowded rooms feeling completely alone. Wade knew that loneliness. He'd been living with it for 3 years. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, when he'd looked into Clara's tired green eyes, he'd felt less alone than he had in a long, long time. Even if it only lasted 3 weeks. Even if she disappeared the moment she got the chance. For 3 weeks, he wouldn't have to pretend. And that was worth $500. That was worth the town's gossip. That was worth whatever came next. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked again, then stopped. Wade finished his coffee, turned down the lamp, and headed upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring work, questions, and probably more judgment from anyone who rode out from town. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Wade Mercer's house didn't feel quite so empty. And that was enough. Clara woke before dawn to the sound of boots on wooden floors and the low murmur of men's voices drifting up from somewhere outside. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before remembering where she was. Wade Mercer's ranch, 12 miles from Black Hollow. 3 weeks until she could disappear. She sat up and looked around the small bedroom. Her torn brown dress hung over the back of a chair. She had nothing else to wear. Nothing else to her name except the clothes on her back and a small knife she kept hidden in her boot. Through the window she could see the sky beginning to lighten, that deep blue that came just before sunrise. Figures moved in the yard below, ranch hands heading toward the barn, probably, starting their day while the rest of the world still slept. Clara stood and dressed quickly. Her body ached from 2 weeks of sleeping in cramped stagecoaches and cheap boarding houses. The bed here had been too soft. She'd barely slept. She made her way downstairs, moving quietly out of habit. The kitchen was empty, but someone had already started a fire in the stove. A pot of coffee sat warming. Clara poured herself a cup and stood at the window watching the ranch wake up. Wade appeared from the direction of the barn, walking with 2 other men. Even from a distance, Clara could tell which one he was. Taller, broader through the shoulders, moving with the kind of confidence that came from owning the ground under your feet. The men talked for a moment, then split up. Wade headed toward the house. Clara moved away from the window. She didn't want to look like she'd been watching for him. The door opened and Wade stepped inside, bringing the smell of horses and morning air with him. He stopped when he saw her. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." Ranch doesn't run itself. Wade moved to the coffee pot and poured himself a cup. "You sleep all right?" "Fine." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Wade didn't press. He stood there drinking his coffee, and Clara stood on the other side of the kitchen drinking hers, and the silence stretched between them like a rope pulled tight. Not hostile exactly, but not comfortable either. "I'm heading out to check the north fence line," Wade said finally. "Won't be back until afternoon. There's food in the pantry if you get hungry. Help yourself to whatever you need." "I'll organize the kitchen," Clara said, "if that's all right." Wade looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to." "I told you. I don't take charity. I work for what I get. It's not charity if you're—" Wade stopped himself. "Never mind. Do what you want. Just don't break anything important." He set down his cup and headed for the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "Jack and the others will be around if you need anything. They know you're here." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That you're staying 3 weeks and then leaving." Clara felt something twist in her chest. "And they're fine with that?" Wade's expression didn't change. "They work for me, not the other way around." He left before Clara could respond. She stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his boots cross the porch, listening to the sound of a horse being saddled, listening to hoofbeats fade into the distance. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The kitchen was cleaner than she'd expected, but disorganized in ways that spoke of a man living alone. Supplies stored in the wrong places. Pots that didn't match their lids. A drawer full of utensils that hadn't been sorted in years. Clara pulled everything out and started over. She was elbow deep in a cabinet full of mismatched dishes when she heard footsteps on the porch. Not Wade's heavy tread, something lighter, more hesitant. A knock at the door. Clara wiped her hands on her dress and opened it. A woman stood there, maybe 50 years old, wearing a nice dress and a determined expression. Clara recognized her from town, the boarding house owner. Martha something. "Morning," the woman said. "I'm Martha Calhoun. Thought I'd ride out and introduce myself proper." Clara doubted that was the real reason, but she stepped aside. "Come in." Martha entered and looked around the kitchen with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Took in the cabinet standing open, the dishes spread across the table, the reorganization in progress. "Making yourself at home," Martha observed. "Earning my keep." "That what Wade's calling it?" Clara felt her jaw tighten. "Is there something you wanted, Mrs. Calhoun?" Martha turned to face her directly. "I wanted to see if you were real." "Real? The whole town's talking about what happened yesterday. Half of them think Wade's lost his mind. Other half think you're running some kind of con. I wanted to see for myself." "And?" Martha studied her for a long moment. "You don't look like a con artist." "What do con artists look like?" "Prettier? Friendlier? Better at lying?" Martha moved to the table and picked up one of the dishes Clara had set aside. "This is good china. Wedding gift, probably. Wade's late wife had family money." Clara didn't say anything. "You know about her?" Martha asked. "Know she existed. Know she's dead. That's all. Sarah Mercer, sweet girl. Too sweet for this country, maybe. Died 3 winters back. Pneumonia." Martha set down the dish. "Wade hasn't been the same since. Keeps to himself mostly. Works from dawn to dark. Doesn't talk unless he has to." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should know what you're walking into." Martha's voice lost some of its edge. "That man out there has been alone for 3 years. People have been trying to fix him up since the day Sarah was buried. He's turned down every widow, every available woman, every setup anyone's tried to arrange. Then yesterday he picks you, a stranger who told him to his face she's planning to leave." Clara crossed her arms. "Your point?" "My point is either Wade Mercer sees something in you that nobody else sees, or he's finally cracked under the weight of being alone. Either way, you should know what kind of situation you've landed in." "I didn't land in anything. I got on a stage for free travel. Wade made his own choice." "Did he?" Martha moved closer. "Or did you say exactly what you knew would hook a lonely man tired of being lied to?" Clara felt anger flash hot in her chest. "You've got a lot of nerve riding out here to accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing you of anything, yet." Martha's eyes were hard. "But if you're playing some game, if you're planning to take advantage of a good man's loneliness, I will make sure everyone in Black Hollow knows exactly what kind of person you are. Wade might be too proud to protect himself, but this town isn't." "I don't need protection from this town," Clara said quietly. "And neither does Wade. We made an arrangement, 3 weeks. That's it. I'm not after his money or his ranch or anything else. I told him that myself." "So you keep saying." "Because it's true." They stared at each other across the kitchen, 2 women trying to measure each other's truth. Martha broke first. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Wade's a good man," she said, softer now. "Better than most out here. He deserves better than whatever game you're playing." "I'm not playing any game." "Then why are you really here?" Clara met her eyes. "Because I needed a way west and 3 weeks of shelter. That's all. No grand plan, no scheme, just survival." Survival. Martha repeated the word like she was testing its weight. "And after 3 weeks? What then?" "Then I move on." "To what?" Clara didn't answer. Martha studied her for another long moment, then nodded once and left without another word. Clara stood in the empty kitchen, hands shaking with anger she couldn't quite name. She went back to organizing dishes, slamming them down harder than necessary. Who the hell did Martha Calhoun think she was? Riding out here like some kind of guardian, making accusations, acting like Clara was the villain in a story she hadn't even asked to be part of. Clara grabbed another stack of plates and shoved them into the cabinet. One of them cracked. She swore and pulled it back out, examining the hairline fracture running through the china. "Wedding gift," Martha had said. "Sarah Mercer's family money." Clara set the cracked plate aside carefully and kept working. By noon, the kitchen was transformed. Everything organized, everything in its proper place. The disorder replaced with something that actually made sense. Clara stood back and looked at what she'd done. It was good work, practical, efficient. She hated that it made her feel something. She grabbed the cracked plate and carried it outside to the burn pile behind the house. Better to throw it away than leave it there as evidence of her anger. The ranch was quiet in the midday heat. Most of the hands were out with the herd. Clara could see horses in the distant pasture, but no people. She was alone. She walked past the barn, past the equipment shed, following a worn path that led toward a small rise behind the main buildings. At the top of the rise, she found a garden, or what used to be a garden. The fence was still intact, but everything inside had gone wild. Weeds choked what might have once been vegetable rows. A trellis had collapsed under the weight of dead vines. In one corner, Clara spotted the remains of what looked like herb plants, rosemary, maybe, or sage, struggling to survive among the chaos. Someone had planted this. Someone had cared for it. Sarah Mercer, probably. Clara stood looking at the ruined garden and felt something uncomfortable settle in her chest. This wasn't just neglect. This was abandonment. Wade had let this die the same way he'd let the china sit unused in the cabinet, because touching it meant remembering. Clara should walk away. It wasn't her business. She was leaving in 3 weeks anyway. Instead, she found herself kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds. She worked without thinking, clearing the worst of the overgrowth, untangling the collapsed trellis, trying to figure out what was still alive underneath all the death. The sun beat down on her shoulders. Her dress got filthy. She didn't care. There was something satisfying about this, about taking something broken and making it slightly less broken, about creating order from chaos. It reminded her of things she'd left behind, lives she'd tried to build before they fell apart. She was so focused on the work that she didn't hear the horse approach. "What are you doing?" Clara jerked upright. Wade sat on his horse at the edge of the garden, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Clearing weeds," Clara said. It came out defensive. Wade dismounted slowly. He walked to the garden fence but didn't enter, just stood there looking at what she'd uncovered. "This was Sarah's," he said finally. "I figured. She spent hours out of here, grew vegetables, herbs, flowers. Said it reminded her of her mother's garden back east." Clara waited. "After she died, I couldn't—" Wade trailed off. "I should have maintained it. Should have kept it going. But every time I looked at it, all I saw was, 'You don't owe me an explanation.'" "I know." Wade's voice was quiet. "But you're out here working on something that isn't yours, so maybe you deserve one anyway." Clara pulled off her makeshift gloves, torn pieces of cloth she'd found in the barn. "I shouldn't have touched it without asking." "No," Wade said. "I'm glad you did." They stood on opposite sides of the fence, not quite looking at each other. "Martha Calhoun came by this morning," Clara said. Wade's expression darkened. "What did she want?" "To warn me that if I hurt you, the whole town will come after me." Jesus. Wade took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "Martha means well, but does she?" Clara cut him off. "Because from where I'm standing, it felt more like she was protecting her own idea of what your life should look like." Wade studied her. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I'm here for 3 weeks and then I'm gone, that I'm not after your money or your land or anything else." "And she believed you?" "No." Clara brushed dirt off her dress. "But I don't particularly care." Wade almost smiled. Almost. "You know half the town's going to be watching us, right? Waiting for you to slip up. Waiting for proof that I made a mistake. Is that going to bother you?" "No, but it might bother you." Clara met his eyes. "I've survived worse than small-town gossip." They held each other's gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them that neither could quite name. "I fixed your kitchen," Clara said, breaking the silence. "Everything's organized now. Should be easier to find things." "You didn't have to do that. I told you, I work for what I get." Wade put his hat back on. "I've got to check the south pasture before dark. You need anything before I go?" "No." He nodded and moved toward his horse. Stopped, turned back. "Clara?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for the kitchen And for, he gestured at the garden. For this. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Wade mounted his horse and rode off toward the south pasture, leaving Clara alone with the half-cleared garden and a strange feeling in her chest that she absolutely refused to examine too closely. She went back to pulling weeds. The next few days fell into a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Wade left before dawn to work the ranch. Clara attacked the house with the same fierce energy she'd used on the garden, cleaning, organizing, fixing small things that had been broken or neglected for years. She didn't ask permission, just did the work. A loose hinge on the pantry door, fixed. A window that wouldn't open properly, fixed. The pump handle that stuck, fixed. Wade noticed everything. He didn't comment, but Clara could tell by the way his eyes tracked the changes, the way he moved through the house more easily now that things worked the way they should. On the third day, Clara found the photograph. She was dusting the mantel, a task that should have been simple, when her cloth caught the edge of a small frame hidden behind a clock. The frame fell. Clara caught it before it hit the floor. A woman's face looked back at her from behind the glass. Young, maybe 25, pretty in that delicate way that didn't survive hard country. Pale skin, soft features, wearing a dress that probably cost more than everything Clara had ever owned combined. Sarah Mercer. Clara should put it back, should respect Wade's privacy, should mind her own business. Instead, she stood there looking at the photograph of a dead woman and trying to understand what she was seeing. This was who Wade had loved. This was who he'd lost. This was the ghost that still lived in every corner of this house. That was taken the month we got married. Clara spun around. Wade stood in the doorway, still wearing his work gloves, dirt on his boots. I'm sorry, Clara said quickly. I didn't mean to, It's fine. Wade moved into the room, pulling off his gloves. I keep forgetting it's there. Started hiding it about a year after she died. Couldn't look at it anymore, but couldn't throw it away either. He took the frame from Clara's hands and stood looking at his dead wife's face. She was 23 in that picture, he said quietly. Youngest daughter of a textile merchant. Came west because her father bought this ranch as an investment, and she wanted to prove she could handle frontier life. Could she? Wade was quiet for a long moment. No, but she tried. Spent 3 years trying to turn this place into something from back east. Garden, fancy dinners, social events. She wanted to bring civilization to the wilderness. His voice was soft, almost fond. Killed herself doing it. The pneumonia? She got sick because she insisted on riding out to deliver food to a neighboring family during a storm. Wouldn't listen when I told her it was too dangerous, said it was her duty as a Christian woman to help those in need. Wade's jaw tightened. She was dead within a week. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Wade set the photograph back on the mantel, but this time he left it visible instead of hiding it. She was a good person, he said. Kind. Generous. Everything a wife was supposed to be. But we were wrong for each other. I knew it 6 months into the marriage. Maybe she did too. Why didn't you divorce? Wade laughed, but there was no humor in it. Frontier wives don't leave their husbands, and ranchers don't admit their marriages failed. So we played the part, smiled for the neighbors, pretended everything was fine, until she died and I didn't have to pretend anymore. He turned to face Clara directly. That's why I chose you, he said. Not because you were older or because you looked desperate or any of the things the town thinks. Because you were the only one who wasn't pretending, the only one honest enough to tell me you didn't want to be there. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Wade, I don't want you to stay if you don't want to stay, he continued. I don't want you to pretend to be someone you're not. I had that for 3 years and it about killed me. So whatever happens in the next 3 weeks, whatever you decide when your time's up, at least it'll be real. At least I'll know I had something honest, even if it was temporary. They stood facing each other in the fading afternoon light, the photograph of Sarah Mercer watching them from the mantel. I can't promise anything, Clara said finally. I can't promise I'll stay. I can't promise I won't disappear the second I get the chance. I'm not asking for promises. What are you asking for? Wade was quiet for a moment. Just don't lie to me. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, don't pretend. That's all I want. Clara felt her throat tighten. That's harder than you think. I know. They stood there in the heavy silence, neither quite willing to walk away from whatever was building between them. I should finish dinner, Clara said eventually. Wade nodded. I should clean up. But neither of them moved. Finally, Wade turned toward the stairs, stopped halfway up. Clara? Yeah? I'm glad you're here, even if it's just for 3 weeks. He went upstairs before she could respond. Clara stood alone in the room with Sarah Mercer's photograph and the uncomfortable truth that she was starting to feel something she absolutely could not afford to feel. She went to the kitchen and started preparing food with hands that shook slightly. That night, they ate dinner together for the first time. Wade sat at one end of the table. Clara sat at the other. The space between them felt both too wide and not wide enough. This is good, Wade said, indicating the simple meal Clara had prepared. Stew, bread, nothing fancy. It's basic. I didn't mean it as criticism. They ate in silence for a while. Jack says some of the cattle are showing signs of illness, Wade said eventually. Might need to separate part of the herd tomorrow. How bad is it? Too early to tell. Could be nothing. Could be the start of something that wipes us out. Clara looked up. That happen often? Often enough. Wade took a drink of water. This country doesn't forgive mistakes. One bad winter, one sick herd, one wrong decision. That's all it takes to lose everything. But you stay anyway. It's what I know. Wade met her eyes. What about you? Where were you planning to go after Black Hollow? Clara set down her fork. I don't know. You don't have a plan? I never have a plan. Just survive today. Figure out tomorrow when it comes. That's no way to live. It's the only way I know how. They finished eating in silence. Clara started to clear the dishes, but Wade stopped her. I'll do it, he said. You cooked. That wasn't the arrangement. There is no arrangement, not really. Wade took her plate. Sit, finish your coffee. You've been working all day. Clara wanted to argue, but something in Wade's expression stopped her. She sat back down and watched him carry dishes to the kitchen, moving through the newly organized space with visible appreciation for the order she'd created. When he came back, he poured them both more coffee and sat down at the table again. Can I ask you something? He said. Depends on the question. What are you running from? Clara felt herself go very still. What makes you think I'm running? Because I recognize it. Wade's voice was gentle. I've been running too, just in place instead of across the country. Clara looked into her coffee cup. It's not running if you don't have anywhere to go back to. That's exactly what running is. She didn't answer. Wade didn't push. He just sat there drinking his coffee, giving her space to decide whether to trust him with the truth. Finally, Clara spoke. I had a daughter, she said quietly, 10 years ago. Fever took her when she was 4. Husband blamed me. Said I should have done more. Called the doctor sooner. Something. Her hands tightened around the coffee cup. He left 6 months after we buried her. Took everything. Left me with nothing but debt and a house I couldn't afford. Wade's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I tried to rebuild, Clara continued. Tried to find work, tried to make it on my own. But everywhere I went, people looked at me like I was cursed. Like losing a child meant I'd done something wrong. Like I was bad luck. That's not it. I know it's not true. The truth doesn't matter when people decide who you are. Clara's voice was harder now. So I stopped trying to convince them otherwise. Started drifting, taking whatever work I could find, moving on when people started asking too many questions. 5 years of that. 5 years of surviving, but not living. And the marriage agency? Saw it as a way west. Thought maybe California, Oregon, somewhere far enough that my past wouldn't follow. The agency paid for passage. I figured 3 weeks in a frontier town was worth the price of a new start. But you told me the truth anyway. Clara met his eyes. Because I'm tired of lying. Tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. You said you wanted honesty. Well, that's it. I'm not a good bet. I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to build a life here because every time I try to build something, it falls apart. So yes, I'm running. But I'm running toward nothing instead of away from something, and I've made my peace with that. The silence that followed was heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Wade stood. He moved to the cabinet Claire had organized and pulled out a bottle she hadn't noticed. Whiskey, mostly empty. He poured 2 glasses and handed her one. To running, he said. Clara took the glass. To running. They drank. The whiskey burned, but it was a good burn. The kind that reminded you that you were still alive, still feeling, still here. I'm not going to try to convince you to stay, Wade said after a moment. I'm not going to make promises about how it'll be different here, how you can start over, how the past doesn't matter. Because you're right, every time someone tries to build something, there's a good chance it'll fall apart. Then why, but? Wade set down his glass. For whatever it's worth, I don't think you're cursed. I don't think you're bad luck. I think you're someone who survived something terrible and kept going anyway. And that's worth more than all the pretty lies those other 9 women could have told me. Clara felt her eyes burn. She blinked hard. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't be kind to me. It makes it harder. Harder to leave? Harder to remember why I need to. Wade nodded slowly. He poured them both another drink. They sat there in the lamplight, 2 broken people drinking whiskey and not making promises neither of them could keep. And for that moment, it was enough. The whiskey bottle was half empty by the time Wade stood to leave. Clara watched him pause at the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight, and for a moment she thought he might say something else. Instead, he just nodded once and disappeared upstairs. Clara sat alone at the table, turning her empty glass in circles on the wood. The house creaked around her, settling sounds, familiar now after only a few days. Outside, she could hear the wind picking up, rattling the shutters. She should go to bed, should stop thinking about the way Wade had looked at her when she'd told him about her daughter. Not with pity, not with judgment, just with understanding. That was dangerous. Clara stood and blew out the lamp. She climbed the stairs in darkness, her hand finding the rail by memory. At the top, she paused outside her bedroom door. Down the hall, light showed under Wade's door. Still awake, she went into her room and closed the door firmly behind her. The next morning, Clara woke to voices outside. Not the usual quiet exchanges between Wade and his ranch hands. Something louder, angrier. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Through the kitchen window, she could see Wade standing in the yard with 3 men she didn't recognize. One of them, a heavy-set man with a thick beard, was pointing his finger at Wade's chest. Clara moved to the door. "Don't care what arrangement you think you have," the bearded man was saying. "That woman's a fraud, and everyone knows it." "You're on my property, Hendricks." Wade's voice was cold. "State your business or get out." Mayor Hendricks. Clara remembered him from the day she'd arrived, standing by the water trough with that approving expression, right up until Wade had made his choice. "My business is the reputation of this town," Hendricks said, "and having a known con artist living on the largest ranch in the territory isn't good for any of us." "Known con artist?" Wade's voice dropped even lower. "Based on what evidence?" "Based on her own admission. She told you herself she only joined that agency for free travel. She's planning to run off with whatever she can steal in 3 weeks. "I haven't stolen anything," Claire said, stepping out onto the porch. All 4 men turned to look at her. Hendricks's expression shifted to something ugly. "There she is," he said, "the woman who's making fools of us all." "I'm not making a fool of anyone. I've been here less than a week, working for my keep and bothering exactly nobody." "Working for your keep?" Hendricks laughed. "That what you call it? Getting your hooks into a lonely man's property?" Wade took a step forward. "That's enough." "Is it?" Hendricks didn't back down. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks like exactly the kind of scheme that gives frontier settlements a bad name. Woman shows up, pretends to need help, gains a man's trust, then disappears with everything she can carry." "I don't want his property," Clara said. "I don't want anything except what? Free room and board while you plan your next move? Except to be left alone for 3 weeks. That was the arrangement. Nobody's being deceived." One of the other men, younger, wearing a deputy's badge, cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, maybe it would be better if you went back inside while you what?" Clara cut him off. "Decide my future without me? No thanks. I'll stay right here." Hendricks turned to Wade. "This is who you chose? This is the woman you think is worth defending?" "I chose someone honest," Wade said quietly, "which is more than I can say for most people in Black Hollow." "Honest?" Hendricks' face was turning red. "She admitted she's planning to leave." "And I accepted that. What business is it of yours?" "It's my business when it affects this entire town. You're one of the largest landowners in the territory. What you do matters. Who you associate with matters. And having a drifter living in your house, pretending to be your wife, she's not pretending to be anything. It makes us all look bad. Makes people think we can't control our own community. Wade's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was locked tight. "Get off my property," Wade said. "Wade, be reasonable. I said get off my property. Now." The deputy put a hand on Hendrix's arm. "Mayor, maybe we should—" Hendrix shook him off. "This isn't over. The town council will be discussing this situation. There are ordinances about— I don't care about your ordinances. This is private property and you're trespassing. Leave before I make you leave." For a moment, Clara thought Hendrix might actually push it. His face was purple now, his fists clenched. But the deputy and the third man, an older rancher Clara had seen once in town, were already backing toward their horses. "You're making a mistake," Hendrix said. "Wouldn't be my first." Hendrix stared at Wade for another long moment, then turned and stalked toward his horse. The three men mounted and rode off without another word, kicking up dust that hung in the still morning air. Wade stood watching until they disappeared over the rise. Then he turned to Clara. "You all right?" "Fine." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back so he wouldn't see. "That was about more than just me, wasn't it?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Hendrix has been trying to buy part of my north pasture for 2 years. I keep refusing. He doesn't like being told no. So this is about land. This is about control. Hendrix thinks running the town means controlling everyone in it." Wade moved toward the porch. "He's wrong." Clara followed him inside. Wade went straight to the coffee pot, poured a cup, and stood at the window staring out at nothing. "I'm making things worse for you," Clara said. "No, Hendrix is making things worse for himself. Wade, he's the mayor. He can talk. That's all." Wade turned to face her. "Town council has no authority over what happens on private land. Hendrix knows that. This was just theater. Effective theater. How many other people feel the same way?" Wade didn't answer. Clara sat down at the table, suddenly exhausted. "Maybe I should just leave now, save you the trouble." "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want." Clara pressed her palms against her eyes. "I didn't come here to cause problems. I just needed— You don't owe me explanations." "Don't I?" Clara dropped her hands. "You're defending me to the whole town. Your reputation is taking hits because of me. The least you can do is exactly what you've been doing. Working, being honest, not pretending to be someone you're not." Wade set down his coffee cup. "Everything else is noise. That noise might cost you business, friendships, standing in the community. Then it wasn't worth having in the first place." They sat in tense silence. Outside, Clara could hear the ranch hands starting their day, oblivious to the confrontation that had just happened, or maybe just smart enough to stay out of it. "I should check on the herd," Wade said finally. "Some of the cattle are still showing symptoms. Might need to call in a veterinarian from Cheyenne if it gets worse." "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." Wade grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. "I'll be back before dark." He left before Clara could respond. She sat alone in the kitchen, listening to hoofbeats fade into the distance, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened settle onto her shoulders. This was exactly why she didn't stay anywhere. This was why she kept moving. Because the moment you stopped, the moment you let yourself exist in one place long enough for people to notice you, everything got complicated. Clara stood and started cleaning up from breakfast with sharp, angry movements. She didn't ask for this. Didn't ask Wade to defend her. Didn't ask the town to care about her presence one way or another. She was supposed to be invisible. That was the whole point. But Wade had made her visible, had chosen her in front of everyone, had brought her to his ranch, had made her into a story the whole town was telling. And now she was trapped in that story, whether she wanted to be or not. Clara scrubbed dishes until her hands were raw. Then she went outside and attacked the garden with the same fierce energy, pulling weeds like they were personally responsible for her situation. She was elbow-deep in dirt when she heard a horse approach. Not again. But when Clara looked up, it wasn't Mayor Hendrix. It was Martha Calhoun, riding side saddle on a gray mare, looking like she'd come on official business. Clara stood slowly, wiping dirt on her dress. "If you're here to tell me I'm ruining Wade's life, you'll have to get in line. The mayor beat you to it." Martha dismounted with surprising grace for a woman her age. I heard about Hendrix. That's actually why I'm here. To pile on? To apologize. Martha tied her horse to the fence post. I was wrong about you. Clara blinked. What? I rode out here last week ready to believe the worst. Thought you were running some game on Wade. But I've been watching. Talking to people who've seen you in town. Jack Morrison says you've been working yourself half to death organizing Wade's house. Sam Patterson says you paid cash for supplies last time you came in. Didn't ask Wade for money. Didn't try to charge anything to his account. I told you I wasn't after his money. People say a lot of things. Martha moved closer to the garden fence. But you're actually living like you mean it. Working for your keep, keeping to yourself. Not playing the role of Wade's wife, even though it'd be easier if you did. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Martha looked at the partially restored garden. This was Sarah's pride and joy. Wade hasn't touched it in 3 years. Couldn't bear to. He told me. Did he? Martha's eyebrows rose. Wade doesn't talk about Sarah. Not to anyone. He showed me her photograph. Told me about how she died. Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then he trusts you more than I thought. Or he's just tired of carrying it alone. Maybe. Martha studied Clara with sharp eyes. You planning to stay after your 3 weeks? No. Even though Wade clearly wants you to? Wade doesn't... Clara stopped. It's complicated. It always is. Clara turned back to the garden, pulling another weed. Why are you really here, Mrs. Calhoun? Because Hendrix is going to make trouble. He's already talking to the town council about ordinances against unregistered cohabitation. Wants to force Wade to either marry you properly or send you away. Clara's stomach dropped. He can't do that. He can try, and he's got support. Not everyone, but enough. Martha's voice was grim. There's a faction in town that never liked Wade having so much land and influence. They're using you as an excuse to cut him down. Then I should leave, today, before it gets worse. And let Hendrix win? Martha shook her head. That'll just prove he can bully anyone in this territory. No, you stay. You keep doing exactly what you've been doing, and you let Wade handle Hendrix. Wade's already taking enough heat because of me. Wade's taking heat because he made a choice that scared people. Because he refused to play by their rules. Martha's expression softened slightly. You know what the real problem is? Wade chose you, a real, complicated, honest woman, instead of the fantasy those other 9 women represented, and that terrifies everyone who's been living their own fantasy about what frontier life should look like. Clara stared at her. That's not... It is. Trust me. Martha moved toward her horse. I've lived in Black Hollow for 20 years. I've watched dozens of marriages built on pretty lies fall apart. But the ones that last? They're built on truth. On 2 people seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. Wade and I aren't... We're not building anything. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. Are you? Martha mounted her horse with the same grace she'd dismounted. Because from where I'm sitting, you're fixing his garden, organizing his house, and sitting up late drinking whiskey with him. That's not the behavior of someone planning to run. You don't know what you're talking about. Martha smiled, not unkindly. Don't I? I've been watching people lie to themselves for 2 decades. I know what it looks like. She turned her horse toward the road. But you'll figure it out eventually. Just don't wait too long. Hendrix isn't patient, and neither is frontier life. She rode off before Clara could respond. Clara stood in the garden, hands full of dirt and weeds, feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet. She wasn't building anything here. She was just passing through, just working for her keep until she could move on. That's what she told herself. But when she looked at the garden she'd been restoring, at the neat rows she'd cleared, at the trellis she'd repaired, at the herb plants she'd carefully untangled from the weeds, it was hard to ignore the truth. This looked like the work of someone who was staying. Clara threw the weeds onto the burn pile with unnecessary force and went back to work. Wade returned just before sunset, looking exhausted. Clara had dinner waiting, nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but he barely touched it. The herd? Clara asked. Bad. Lost 3 head today, might lose more by morning. Wade pushed food around his plate without eating. Called for a veterinarian from Cheyenne, but it'll be 2 days before he can get here. By then... He didn't finish the sentence. Clara wanted to say something helpful, something comforting. But she didn't know anything about cattle or disease or what happened when a ranch lost part of its herd. Martha came by today, she said instead. Wade looked up. What did she want? To warn me that Hendricks is planning to push ordinances about, Clara paused, about us, about me living here without being properly married. Wade's jaw tightened. Of course he is. She said he's got support on the town council. He always has support for anything that gives him more control. Wade finally took a bite of stew. Doesn't mean it'll pass, but it might. Then we'll deal with it. How? Wade set down his fork. What are you asking me, Clara? I'm asking if you want me to leave. If it would be easier. No. The word was flat, final. Wade, your herd is sick. The town's turning against you. The mayor is making threats, all because you chose me instead of a lie. Wade's eyes were hard. Yes, and I'd make the same choice tomorrow. Even if it costs you everything? It won't cost me everything, just some things that weren't worth keeping anyway. Clara stood and started clearing dishes. You don't know that. I know I spent 3 years living the life everyone expected me to live. Playing the grieving widower, keeping my head down, being respectable. Wade's voice was rough, and I was miserable every single day. So if choosing you, choosing honesty over performance, means losing some cattle and some fake friendships, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. You might not feel that way when winter comes and your herd is decimated. Maybe not. Wade stood and carried his plate to the kitchen. But I'll feel it honestly. That's worth something. They stood side by side at the sink, not quite touching. The kitchen was warm from the stove, the air heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. I don't deserve this, Clara said quietly. Deserve what? Your faith, your defense, any of it. Wade turned to face her. Did I ask you to deserve it? Clara met his eyes. No. Then stop trying to talk me out of choices I've already made. His voice was softer now. You told me you're leaving in 2 weeks. I heard you. I'm not asking you to change your plans. I'm just asking you to stop apologizing for existing while you're here. Clara felt her throat tighten. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. They stood looking at each other in the lamplight, the air between them charged with something neither was ready to name. The moment broke when they heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Wade moved to the window. That's Jack, and the others. He went outside. Clara followed. 4 riders came into the yard at a gallop. Jack Morrison jumped down before his horse had fully stopped. Boss, we've got trouble. Real trouble. The herd? Someone cut the fence on the north pasture. Cattle are scattered across 3 ranches. We've been trying to round them up, but... Jack paused, breathing hard. Some of them wandered onto Hendricks' land. He's holding them. Says he'll only release them if you pay a recovery fee. Wade's expression went very still. How much? $500. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. That's half what those cattle are worth, Wade said quietly. I know, and that's probably the point. Jack's face was grim. Hendricks is making a play, using the fence cutting as an excuse to squeeze you. Did you see who cut the fence? No, but it was clean. Done with tools, not broken by the cattle. Someone knew what they were doing. Wade stood silent for a long moment. Clara could see him calculating. Costs, losses, implications. Round up everything we can from the other properties, he said finally. Bring them back to the south pasture. Post guards on all the fence lines tonight. I'll deal with Hendricks in the morning. Boss, if you pay him, I'm not paying him anything. Jack looked uncertain. Then how? I said I'll handle it. Wade's voice was final. Get the cattle secured. Now. Jack nodded and remounted. The riders disappeared back into the darkness, leaving Wade and Clara standing in the yard. This was because of me, Clara said. Wade didn't answer. Hendricks came here this morning. You threw him off your property. Now suddenly your fence is cut and your cattle are on his land. Clara's voice was shaking. This is retaliation. You don't know that. Don't I? Clara moved closer. Wade, this is exactly what I was afraid of. My being here is costing you. Actually costing you. We don't know who cut that fence. We know. You know. Everyone knows. Clara felt something breaking inside her chest. I should leave. Tonight, before this gets worse. And let Hendricks think he can bully people off their own property? Wade's voice was hard. No. This isn't about pride. This is about your livelihood, your ranch. This is about both. Wade turned to face her fully. If I let Hendricks win this, if I send you away because he applied pressure, then I've just told every powerful man in this territory that they can control my life. Is that what you want? I want you to not lose everything because you were trying to be noble about... This isn't nobility. This is survival. Wade's eyes were fierce. Not just mine. The ranch, yes. But also the principle. The moment I give in to Hendricks's threats is the moment I lose any real power in this territory. Clara understood what he was saying. She'd seen it before. Powerful men testing boundaries, looking for weakness. Once they found it, they never stopped pushing. But understanding didn't make it easier. So what are you going to do? She asked. Take back my cattle, without paying. How? Wade's smile was cold. By reminding Hendricks that he's not the only one with leverage in this valley. He went inside without explaining further. Clara stood in the yard, feeling the night air cool against her skin, wondering how a simple 3-week arrangement had turned into a war she never wanted to fight. But the truth was sitting heavy in her chest now, undeniable no matter how much she wanted to ignore it. This wasn't just about Wade's pride or Hendricks's power plays. This was about her, about whether she was worth fighting for. And the terrifying part, the part that kept her standing in that yard long after Wade had gone inside, was that she was starting to believe she might be. Clara barely slept that night. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the ranch, horses moving in the corral, men's voices calling to each other as they changed guard shifts, the creak of the house settling. Somewhere past midnight, she heard Wade's door open and his boots on the stairs. Through her window, she watched him cross the yard to speak with Jack at the fence line. He stood out there for nearly an hour before coming back inside. Clara was up and dressed before dawn. When she came downstairs, Wade was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee with one hand while studying a hand-drawn map spread across the table. "Morning," he said without looking up. "You have a plan." "Something like that." Wade marked an X on the map. Hendricks's north property borders the creek, only water source for miles in that direction. He's been routing water to his cattle through a series of channels he dug 5 years ago. Clara moved closer to look at the map. And those channels cross a corner of my land, about 40 feet, right here. Wade tapped the map. Easement agreement Sarah's father signed before I took over the ranch. Lets Hendricks use that strip for water access in exchange for maintaining the fence line between our properties. The fence line he claims your cattle damaged. The fence line someone cut. Wade's voice was hard. Which means Hendricks violated the easement terms. Clara began to see it. So you can cut off his water access. Legally, yes. Practically. Wade folded the map. His cattle would die of thirst within 3 days. He knows it. I know it. Which means he knows I won't actually do it. Then what good? But I can threaten it, and I can start enforcing other terms of that easement he's been ignoring for years. Required fence maintenance, drainage responsibilities. There's a whole list of obligations he's been shirking because nobody's called him on it. Clara poured herself coffee. You're going to bleed him with paperwork. I'm going to remind him that power goes both ways. Wade rolled up the map. He thinks he's got leverage because he's holding my cattle. But I've got leverage too, and mine doesn't require me to be cruel to animals to use it. Will it work? Depends on whether Hendricks is smart enough to back down. Wade finished his coffee. Either way, I'm not paying him $500 for cattle he stole. He left before Clara could ask more questions. She spent the morning doing what she'd been doing for the past week, working, organizing, fixing things that were broken. The routine was familiar now, almost comforting. But underneath everything was the tight knot of tension that had settled in her stomach the moment Jack had ridden in with news about the fence. Around midday, Martha Calhoun arrived again. This time she wasn't alone. 3 women climbed down from a wagon, all of them around Martha's age, all of them wearing expressions that said they meant business. Clara met them on the porch, wiping flour from her hands. "Mrs. Calhoun." "Clara," Martha gestured to the other women. "This is Helen Price, Ann Morrison, and Ruth Stevens. Our husbands own the 3 ranches closest to Wade's property. The women nodded in greeting. Clara didn't miss the way they were studying her, taking in her worn dress, her work-roughened hands, the flower in her hair. "What can I do for you?" Clara asked. Helen Price, a stern-looking woman with gray hair pulled back tight, spoke first. "We heard about the fence cutting, about Hendricks holding Wade's cattle. News travels fast. It's a small territory." Ann Morrison was younger than the others, maybe 40, with kind eyes. "We also heard Hendricks is planning to push that ordinance at tonight's council meeting, the one about unregistered cohabitation." Clara's stomach dropped. "Tonight?" "Emergency session," Martha said. "He's moving faster than we thought." "Then maybe I should—" "Stay exactly where you are," Ruth Stevens cut in. She was the oldest of the group, probably close to 60, with a voice that sounded like it had given orders for decades. "We didn't come here to tell you to leave. We came to tell you we're voting against Hendricks's ordinance." Clara blinked. "You're on the town council?" "We're married to men on the town council," Helen corrected, "which means we have considerable influence over how they vote, whether they admit it or not." "But why would you— I thought the whole town doesn't think anything," Martha said. "Just the loud parts. The rest of us have been watching, paying attention, and we've noticed that Wade's house looks better than it has in 3 years, that he seems less hollow. We also noticed," Anne added quietly, "that you've been restoring Sarah's garden." The women exchanged glances. Clara felt suddenly exposed, like they could see things she'd been trying to hide even from herself. "Sarah was a good woman," Ruth said, "but she was never truly happy here. Tried too hard to make this place into something it wasn't. Nearly killed herself trying." She paused. "You're not trying to change anything, just fixing what's broken. That's different." "I'm not trying to replace—" "We know," Helen interrupted. "That's the point. You're not trying to be Sarah. You're not trying to be anything except yourself. And somehow that's exactly what Wade needs." Clara didn't know what to say to that. Martha stepped forward. "The ordinance won't pass. We'll make sure of it. But Hendricks is going to keep pushing. He sees Wade's choice of you as a crack in Wade's armor, something he can exploit." "Then I should leave before what?" Ruth's voice was sharp. "Before you admit you want to stay? Before you stop running from something good because you're afraid it'll fall apart?" The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "I watched you lose a daughter," Ruth continued, softer now. "Lose a husband. Lose everything. I know because I lost a son 15 years ago. Fever, just like your girl. And I spent 5 years after that afraid to care about anything because caring meant risking that kind of pain again." Clara's throat was tight. "I'm not— You are. And it's understandable. But Clara—" Ruth moved closer. "Wade's not your dead husband. This ranch isn't your old life. You get to make a different choice this time." "What if I make the wrong one?" "Then you make it wrong," Helen said. "But at least you'll have made it, instead of letting fear decide for you." The women left shortly after, taking their wagon back toward town. Clara stood on the porch watching them go, feeling like the ground had shifted again. She went back inside and tried to focus on kneading bread dough, but her hands were shaking too badly. She gave up and went outside to the garden instead. The afternoon sun was hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer. Clara worked methodically, clearing more weeds, repairing another section of fence. Physical work. Something she could control. She was so focused that she didn't hear the riders until they were almost at the fence. 5 men on horseback. Clara recognized 2 of them, ranch hands from neighboring properties, who sometimes came by to trade news with Wade's crew. The others were strangers. The lead rider, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, tipped his hat. "Afternoon, miss. Wade Mercer around?" "He's out," Clara said carefully. "Can I help you?" "Maybe." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Carson. These boys and I heard Wade might be having some trouble with his cattle situation. Thought we'd offer our services." "What kind of services?" "The kind that gets cattle back from men who steal them." Carson's hand rested casually on the rifle strapped to his saddle. "For a reasonable fee, of course." Clara understood immediately. These men weren't here to help. They were here to profit from Wade's trouble, or make it worse. "Wade doesn't need your help," she said firmly. "You sure about that? Heard Hendricks has about 30 head penned up. That's a lot of money to lose over pride. It's not about pride. No? Carson leaned forward in his saddle. Then what's it about? Because from where I'm sitting, looks like Wade's got himself in a situation where he needs friends. And we could be very good friends, for the right price. Clara's hand moved slowly toward the knife in her boot. I said Wade doesn't need your help. Now get off this property. Carson laughed. You got spirit, I like that. But lady, you're not in a position to... She said, get off the property. Everyone turned. Jack Morrison stood at the barn entrance with a rifle pointed directly at Carson. Behind him, two more of Wade's hands appeared, also armed. Carson's smile faded. Just making a friendly offer? Don't look friendly to me, Jack said. Looks like 5 armed men threatening a woman on private land. That the kind of friendly you mean? The tension pulled tight. Carson's hand was still near his rifle. Jack's finger was on the trigger. Clara could feel violence hanging in the air like static before a storm. Then one of Carson's men, the youngest one, shifted his horse backward. Boss, maybe we should so. Yeah, Carson said slowly. Maybe we should. He looked at Clara. You tell Wade we came by. Tell him the offer stands if he changes his mind. He won't. Carson shrugged. Men change their minds when they get desperate enough. And Wade's got plenty to be desperate about. The 5 riders turned and left at a leisurely pace, making it clear they weren't afraid, just choosing to leave. Jack didn't lower his rifle until they were out of sight. You all right? He asked Clara. Fine. Clara's heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. Who were they? Trouble. Jack finally lowered the rifle. Carson runs a crew that hires out for range disputes, cattle recovery, fence line enforcement, that sort of thing. Legal enough on the surface, but everyone knows they're basically hired guns. Did Hendricks send them? Maybe. Or maybe they just heard about the situation and saw an opportunity. Jack looked at Clara with new respect. You handled that well. Most women would have run inside. I'm not most women. Yeah, Wade mentioned that. Jack almost smiled. He also said to keep an eye on things while he's gone. Guess he knew what he was talking about. Where is Wade? Town, meeting with some of the other ranchers about water rights and easement agreements, using the law instead of guns. Jack shook his head. Smarter than fighting, but it takes longer. People get impatient. Hence Carson and his friends. Jack headed back to the barn, leaving Clara standing in the garden with her pulse still racing. She went inside and tried to keep working, but every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. She kept thinking about Carson's hand on that rifle, about how close things had come to violence. This was getting worse, not better. Wade returned just before sunset, looking exhausted. Clara had dinner waiting, but she could barely sit still while he ate. Carson came by today, she said finally. Wade's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What did he want? To offer his services getting your cattle back for a price. Did he threaten you? Not exactly, but Jack had to run him off with a rifle. Wade set down his fork. You all right? I'm fine, but Wade, this is escalating. First Hendricks, now hired guns showing up at your property. Carson's always looking for work. Doesn't mean Hendricks sent him. Doesn't mean he didn't. Clara leaned forward. How did the meeting go? Wade was quiet for a moment. Better than expected. Turns out Hendricks has been cutting corners on easement obligations with 3 other ranchers, too. They're willing to back me in demanding compliance. Will that get your cattle back? It'll pressure Hendricks to negotiate. Whether he actually backs down, Wade shrugged. We'll see. And if he doesn't, then we go to court, sue for damages and theft of property. That could take months. Probably. Can the ranch survive that long without those cattle? Wade looked at her for a long moment. Are you asking if we can survive? Or if I can? Clara felt her breath catch. I don't... Because I can survive losing 30 head. Ranch will take a hit, but we'll recover. What I can't survive is playing by Hendricks's rules, giving in to threats, living afraid. Wade's voice was steady. So yes, it might take months, might cost more than it should, but we'll do it the right way. We, Claire repeated softly. Wade didn't look away. That a problem? Before Clara could answer, they heard horses again, multiple riders moving fast. Wade stood and grabbed the rifle from above the door, Clara followed him outside. 7 riders this time, but these weren't strangers. Helen Price's husband led the group, with Ann Morrison's husband right behind him. The other 5 were ranchers Clara recognized from town. Thomas Price dismounted quickly. "Wait, we've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where Hendricks just proposed a deal to half the ranchers in the territory. Says if we side with him against you in the easement dispute, he'll give us favorable water rights for the next 10 years. Wade's expression didn't change. "And you came all the way out here to tell me you're taking his deal?" "Hell no," Thomas said. "We came to tell you he's desperate, making promises he can't keep to build opposition against you, which means he knows he's losing," another rancher finished. "Legal pressure's working. He's trying to undercut you before the other ranchers force him to negotiate." Wade absorbed this information quietly. "How many took his offer?" 3 so far. All of them small operations who can't afford to fight. Can't blame them for taking the safety." "I don't." Wade's voice was firm. "What about the rest of you?" "We stand with you," Thomas said. "But Wade, you need to understand. If this goes to court, Hendricks is going to fight dirty. He'll drag Sarah's name through the mud. He'll bring up Clara's situation. He'll use every bit of ammunition he has." "Let him." "Wade." "I said let him." Wade's voice was steel. "I'm tired of making decisions based on what Hendricks might do, what the town might think, what's safe versus what's right." He looked at the assembled ranchers. "You're either with me or you're not, but I'm done compromising with bullies." The men exchanged glances. Then one by one, they nodded. "All right," Thomas said. "Then we fight. But we do it together. Unified front. Hendricks can't pressure all of us at once." They talked strategy for another hour. Who would file formal complaints? Who would document easement violations? How to build a legal case that couldn't be ignored. Clara listened from the porch, watching Wade coordinate with men who respected him enough to risk their own interests on his judgment. This was what leadership looked like. Not the loud, bullying kind Hendricks practiced. The quiet, steady kind that made people want to follow. When the ranchers finally left, Wade came back to the porch and sat down heavily on the steps. Clara sat beside him. "That was something," she said. "That was necessary." Wade rubbed his face. "Hendricks is panicking, making mistakes, but that also makes him dangerous. The women came by earlier too. Martha and 3 others. Said they're voting against the ordinance tonight." Wade looked at her. "They told you that?" "They also told me I should stop running from things that scare me." "Good advice." "Is it?" Clara pulled her knees up to her chest. "Because from where I'm sitting, staying seems like it would hurt you more than leaving. That's not your decision to make, isn't it? If my presence here is causing you to lose cattle, lose allies, lose standing in the community, then that's my choice to make," Wade interrupted. "Not yours. I chose you, Clara, knowing exactly what it might cost. You don't get to override that choice just because it got hard." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know how to stay." "Then learn." "What if I can't?" Wade turned to face her. "What if you can?" They sat in the fading light, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, neither quite willing to cross that final distance. 2 weeks left, Clara said softly, on the original arrangement. "I know." "And then what?" "I don't know." Wade's honesty was brutal. "I can't promise you easy. Can't promise the town will accept you. Can't even promise the ranch will survive whatever Hendricks throws at us next." "Then what can you promise?" Wade looked at her directly. "That I won't lie to you. Won't ask you to be someone you're not. Won't make you live in Sarah's shadow or anyone else's. And that if you choose to stay, really stay, it'll be because you want to, not because you're trapped or obligated or running out of options." Clara felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd been keeping locked tight for 5 years. "I lost everything once," she whispered. "My daughter, my husband, my home. Everything, and I promised myself I'd never risk that kind of loss again." "I know. But staying here, staying with you, that's exactly that risk." "I know that too." They sat in silence. The sun had dropped below the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, cattle were calling to each other in the gathering dark. "I'm scared," Clara admitted. "So am I." She turned to look at him. "Of what?" "That you'll leave. That you'll stay. That I'll fail you the way I failed Sarah. Wade's voice was raw. That I'll wake up one morning and you'll be gone and I'll have to learn how to be alone all over again. Clara felt tears burning her eyes. Wade, but I'd rather have that fear than the certainty of never trying. He met her eyes. So I'm asking you, not for promises, not for commitments, just to consider the possibility that maybe this could work. Clara couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture, simple, but it felt like crossing a canyon. Wade's fingers closed around hers, rough, calloused, steady. They sat there holding hands on the porch steps while the stars came out, neither saying anything, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. Inside the house, the clock chimed the hour. Somewhere in town, the council meeting was happening. Hendricks was making his arguments. The ordinance was being debated. But out here, on Wade Mercer's porch, two broken people were beginning to believe that maybe broken things could still fit together. Maybe even make something stronger than they'd been apart. Clara didn't know what would happen tomorrow. Didn't know if the council would pass the ordinance, if Hendricks would escalate, if the ranch would survive the legal battle ahead. But for the first time in 5 years, she wanted to find out. For the first time in 5 years, she wanted to stay and see what came next. That night, Clara lay awake in bed, still feeling the warmth of Wade's hand in hers, still hearing his words, still trying to understand what she was feeling. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something. Something real. Something honest. Something worth not running from. She fell asleep thinking about gardens and broken things and the difference between surviving and living. And for the first time since her daughter had died, Clara Bennett dreamed about the future instead of running from the past. The news came at breakfast. Jack rode in hard just after dawn, his horse lathered with sweat. The ordinance failed, he said, still breathing heavy from the ride. 4 votes to 3. Hendricks is furious. Wade set down his coffee cup slowly. Martha and the others came through. More than that. Thomas Price stood up in the meeting and called Hendricks out publicly. Said the whole thing was retaliation for the easement dispute. Half the town was there. They heard everything. Clara felt something unclench in her chest. So it's over? Jack's expression darkened. The ordinance is dead. But Hendricks, he looked at Wade, he's not backing down on the cattle. If anything, he's doubling down. Says if you want them back, you'll pay the fee or take him to court. Then we go to court. Boss, that could take 6 months, maybe longer. I know. Jack shifted uncomfortably. There's something else. The veterinarian finally made it out yesterday to look at the sick cattle. Says it's blackleg disease, highly contagious. We've already lost 8 head. Could lose more if we don't separate the herd and treat the rest immediately. Wade's jaw tightened. How much will treatment cost? $300, minimum. The number sat heavy in the morning air. Clara did the math quickly. 30 head held by Hendricks, 8 already dead from disease, 300 for treatment, legal fees if this went to court. Wade was bleeding money from multiple wounds at once. Do it, Wade said. Whatever it takes to save the herd. That'll put us pretty thin going into summer. If we have a bad season, I said do it. Jack nodded and left. Wade stood at the window, staring out at the ranch he was fighting to keep. Clara moved beside him. How bad is it really? Bad enough. Wade didn't look at her. I can cover the treatment. Can probably weather the court costs. But if we lose more cattle to disease, if the summer's dry, if Hendricks manages to tie things up long enough, he stopped. I might have to sell off some of the land. The north pasture, probably. The one Hendricks has been trying to buy. Yeah. Clara felt anger flash hot in her chest. He's trying to force you into selling. This whole thing, the fence cutting, holding your cattle, the ordinance, it's all been about getting that land. Probably. Wade's voice was tired. Smart, really. Can't beat me outright, so bleed me until I don't have a choice. What if you married me? The words came out before Clara had fully thought them through. Wade turned to stare at her. What? The ordinance failed, but the pressure is still there. Half the town thinks I'm here under false pretenses. But if we actually married properly, legally, that undercuts Hendricks' whole angle, takes away his ammunition. Wade's expression was unreadable. You want to marry me to spite Hendricks? I want to marry you because... Clara stopped. The truth was sitting right there, terrifying and undeniable. Because I'm tired of running. Because staying here, working this ranch, being with you, it's the first time in 5 years I've felt like I might have a future worth fighting for. Wade was very still. Clara, I know it's fast. I know it's not romantic. I know we're doing this backwards and for half the wrong reasons. Clara's voice was shaking now. But I also know that you're the first person in years who's seen me, really seen me, and didn't ask me to be someone else. And I don't want to lose that. You don't have to marry me to keep it. Maybe not, but I want to. Clara met his eyes. If you'll have me. Wade stood there for a long moment, studying her face like he was trying to read something written in a language he'd forgotten. Are you sure? He asked finally. No, Clara admitted. I'm terrified, but I'm sure I want to try. Wade moved closer. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands, rough palms against her cheeks, steady and warm. Then yes, he said quietly, I'll have you. He kissed her then, not desperately, not passionately, just firmly, honestly, like he was making a promise he intended to keep. When they pulled apart, Clara was crying. She didn't know when the tears had started. We'll do it right, Wade said. No rushing, no pretending it's something it's not. We'll get married because we both choose it, because we both want to see what we can build together. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. But Clara, Wade continued, his voice serious, this doesn't fix the ranch's problems. Doesn't get the cattle back. Doesn't stop Hendricks from being a bastard. I know. We might still lose, might lose badly. I know that too. Clara wiped her eyes. But at least we'll lose together. Wade almost smiled. That's a hell of a proposal. You got a better one? No, Wade admitted. No, I really don't. They told Jack first. He took the news with the kind of stoic acceptance that suggested very little surprised him anymore. About time, was all he said. Then, softer. She's good for you, boss. Even a blind man could see it. They rode into Black Hollow together that afternoon to file the marriage license. The clerk, a pinch-faced woman who'd probably already heard every rumor in the territory, looked at them with barely concealed shock. You're sure about this? She asked Wade, ignoring Clara entirely. I'm sure. Because there's a waiting period. 3 days. Gives people time to reconsider. I won't be reconsidering. The clerk sniffed and filled out the paperwork with obvious disapproval. When they left, Clara could feel eyes following them down the street. That's going to be all over town by sunset, she said. Let it. Wade helped her into the wagon. People are going to talk no matter what we do. Might as well give them something worth talking about. They stopped at Martha Calhoun's boarding house on the way out of town. Martha answered the door with a knowing expression. I heard, she said, before either of them could speak. Congratulations. How did you already... Clara stopped. Never mind. I have my sources. Martha smiled. When's the ceremony? 3 days, Wade said, after the waiting period. Nothing fancy, just the legal requirement. The hell it is. Martha crossed her arms. You're getting married properly, with witnesses, in front of the whole damn town. Otherwise, Hendricks will spend the next year claiming it wasn't legitimate. Wade looked like he wanted to argue. Clara touched his arm. She's right, Clara said quietly. We do this publicly or we give Hendricks ammunition. Wade sighed. Fine, but nothing elaborate. I'm not turning this into a spectacle. A simple ceremony, Martha agreed, but a public one. I'll spread the word. 3 days from now, noon at the community hall. Be there. She closed the door before they could argue further. On the ride back to the ranch, Clara felt the weight of what they'd just set in motion. 3 days. In 3 days, she'd be married, legally bound to a man she'd known less than 3 weeks, tied to a place she'd never meant to stay. You can still change your mind, Wade said, reading her silence. So can you. I won't. Neither will I. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable quiet. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation that neither of them had wanted, but both understood was necessary. Martha organized everything with ruthless efficiency. Flowers from the gardens around town, a simple meal for after the ceremony, enough chairs for the inevitable crowd. Clara worked on the ranch as usual, but found herself distracted. She'd catch herself staring at Wade across the yard, or touching the simple band he'd bought in town, or wondering what the hell she was doing. Ruth Stevens rode out on the second day bringing a dress. "It was my daughter's," she said, holding up a simple blue cotton dress with white trim. "She wore it to her own wedding 15 years ago. Thought you might want something besides—" She gestured at Clara's worn brown dress. Clara took the blue dress carefully. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will." Ruth's voice was firm. "Consider it a welcome gift. You're one of us now, whether you feel like it or not. I don't know how to be one of you." "None of us did at first." Ruth's expression softened. "This country doesn't come with instructions. You just survive it one day at a time and hope you're doing more good than harm." After Ruth left, Clara held the blue dress up to herself in front of the small mirror in her room. It fit reasonably well. She looked different in it, less like a drifter, more like someone who belonged somewhere. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. The night before the wedding, Wade found her in the garden. She was working by lamplight, transplanting seedlings she'd started from the herbs she'd salvaged weeks ago. "You're going to wear yourself out," he said. "Can't sleep anyway." Wade sat on the fence. "Second thoughts?" "About 100. Clara sat back on her heels. "You?" "Same." They looked at each other in the lamplight. "What if we're making a mistake?" Clara asked quietly. "Then it's our mistake to make." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Sarah and I got married because that's what people expected. What our families wanted. What made sense on paper. And we spent 3 years trying to make it work and failing. That's not exactly encouraging." "I'm not finished." Wade climbed down from the fence and knelt beside her in the dirt. "This time I'm marrying someone because I want to. Not because it makes sense, not because it solves problems, but because when I look at you, I see someone worth choosing every day, even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I'm not good at this. At being vulnerable. At staying when things get difficult. I know. I might mess this up completely. Probably." Wade reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But you'll mess it up honestly, and that's all I'm asking for." Clara leaned into his touch. "I'm going to hold you to that. I'm counting on it." They stayed in the garden until the lamp burned low, talking about nothing and everything, avoiding the subject of tomorrow while simultaneously preparing for it. When they finally went inside, Wade stopped her at the stairs. "Clara?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for choosing to stay." Clara touched his face gently. "Thank you for making it worth staying for." The wedding day dawned clear and hot. Clara woke before sunrise, nerves singing through her body like current through a wire. She dressed carefully in Ruth's blue dress, pinned her hair back the way she'd seen town women do it, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked terrified. She looked determined. She looked like someone about to jump off a cliff and hope there was water below. Wade was already downstairs, wearing clothes Clara had never seen, a dark suit that must have been stored away for years. He looked uncomfortable in it, looked like he'd rather be in his work clothes. But he'd made the effort. For her. For this. "You look—" Wade stopped. "Different." "Is that good or bad?" "Neither. Just different." Wade's expression softened. "You look like you." They rode into town in the wagon, not talking much. The community hall was already crowded when they arrived. Clara had expected maybe 20 people. There had to be 60. Martha met them at the door. "Everyone wanted to see this. The whole territory's been talking about nothing else for 3 days." "That's what I was afraid of," Clara muttered. "Nonsense. Let them talk. Let them see." Martha straightened Clara's dress collar. "You're about to prove every gossip in Black Hollow wrong. Enjoy it." The ceremony itself was simple. The circuit judge, a weathered man who'd probably performed 100 weddings in a dozen frontier towns, kept it brief and legal. Clara repeated words she barely heard, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. When Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand was steady. Hers was shaking. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the judge said. Wade kissed her, quick, almost formal, and the room erupted in applause that felt equal parts genuine and skeptical. They turned to face the crowd. Clara saw friendly faces, Martha, Ruth, Anne, Helen. She saw curious faces, disapproving faces, faces that were clearly waiting to see how this played out. And in the back, standing alone with his arms crossed, she saw Hendrix. He wasn't clapping. The meal after was awkward but bearable. People came up to offer congratulations that ranged from heartfelt to obligatory. Clara smiled and thanked them and tried not to feel like an imposter wearing someone else's life. She was talking with Anne Morrison when she noticed Hendrix approaching Wade. The conversation looked tense. Clara excused herself and moved closer, not quite joining them, but close enough to hear. "Doesn't change anything," Hendrix was saying. "You still owe me for those cattle." "I don't owe you anything," Wade replied quietly. "You're still holding my property illegally, and now that I'm married, your attempt to paint me as some kind of moral degenerate falls pretty flat." Hendrix's face darkened. "This is a joke. Everyone knows she only married you for..." "For what?" Clara interrupted, stepping between them. "For his money? His land? His sparkling personality?" Hendrix looked at her with barely concealed contempt. "You tell me." "I married him because he's honest. Because he treats people with respect even when they don't deserve it. Because he's building something real instead of tearing others down to make himself look bigger." Claire's voice was steady. "Which is more than I can say for you. You don't know anything about this territory, about what it takes to... I know about men who use power to bully people into submission. I know about men who can't stand seeing others succeed without their permission. And I know that kind of man always loses in the end, because nobody actually respects them." Clara stepped closer. "So go ahead. Keep holding those cattle, keep pushing, but understand that you're not fighting just Wade anymore. You're fighting both of us. And I've got a lot less to lose than you do." Hendrix stared at her with pure hatred. Then he turned and walked out of the hall. The room had gone very quiet. Clara could feel everyone watching. Wade moved beside her, his hand finding hers. "That was something," he said softly. "That was necessary." Martha appeared at Clara's other side. "Well," she said loudly enough for the room to hear, "I'd say Clara Mercer just proved she belongs here more than some people who've lived in Black Hollow their whole lives." There was a moment of silence. Then Thomas Price started clapping. Others joined in. Not everyone. Clara could see plenty of disapproving faces, but enough. Enough to matter. They left the hall an hour later, riding back to the ranch as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Clara still wore the blue dress. Wade still wore the uncomfortable suit. Neither of them said much. When they reached the ranch, Wade helped her down from the wagon. "You all right?" he asked. "I just picked a fight with the most powerful man in the territory at my own wedding." Clara laughed shakily. "I'm either all right or completely insane." "Little of both, probably." They stood in the yard as the sun painted everything gold. Clara looked at the house, her house now, legally, and felt something shift inside her chest. This was real. This was happening. This was her life now. "What do we do now?" she asked. Wade considered. "I need to change out of this suit before I suffocate. You probably want to do the same, then..." He paused. "Then we just live. Work the ranch. Fight Hendrix in court. Figure out how to be married to each other. Same as any other day." "Except it's not." "No," Wade agreed. "It's not." Clara took a deep breath. "Okay, let's go live then." The next weeks fell into a new rhythm that was both strange and familiar. Clara was legally Clara Mercer now, but she still got up before dawn to work. Still organized and fixed and planted. Wade still left early to manage the herd, still came back exhausted. But now they ate dinner together every night. Now they talked about plans, not just for tomorrow, but for months from now, years from now. Now when Wade reached for her hand, she took it. The legal battle with Hendrix dragged on exactly as everyone had predicted. Paperwork filed, counter-paperwork filed, lawyers from Cheyenne getting involved, the whole thing grinding forward at a pace that made glaciers look fast. But something had shifted in the territory. Other ranchers started filing their own complaints about Hendrix's violations. Water rights, easement obligations, fence maintenance, all the small things he'd been ignoring for years because nobody had challenged him. One by one, Hendrix's advantages started eroding. 6 weeks after the wedding, he finally backed down. He returned the cattle, the ones that had survived anyway, and dropped his recovery fee demand. In exchange, the other ranchers agreed not to pursue their easement complaints further. It wasn't a victory. Wade had lost cattle to disease, lost weeks of work, lost money he couldn't really afford to lose. But it wasn't a defeat either. And in frontier country, surviving was sometimes the same as winning. Clara was in the garden when Wade came to find her with the news. She'd been working on it all summer, and it was finally starting to look like something Sarah would have been proud of. Vegetables growing in neat rows, herbs flourishing in their corner, even a few flowers she'd transplanted from the wild parts of the property. "It's over," Wade said. Hendricks settled. Clara sat back on her heels. "How do you feel?" "Tired. Angry that it happened at all. Relieved it's done." Wade looked at the garden. "This looks good." "It's getting there." Wade knelt beside her in the dirt. "I was thinking, with the cattle back, if we have a decent fall, we might break even this year, maybe even turn a small profit." "That's good." "And next spring, if things go well, we could expand, buy some breeding stock, maybe hire another hand." Clara looked at him. "You're planning ahead." "I am." "That's new." "Yeah." Wade met her eyes. "I've got something worth planning for now." Clara felt her chest tighten in that way that used to terrify her, but was starting to feel familiar. Good, even. "I'm not pregnant," she said suddenly. Wade blinked. "Okay?" "I just wanted to say it, in case you were wondering, in case you thought that's why I—" Clara stopped. "I'm not. I don't know if I can be, after everything, but I wanted you to know." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you? Not knowing?" "Sometimes." Clara pulled up a weed that had no business being there. "I think about my daughter, about how I was a mother once and might never be again, about whether that makes me less somehow." "It doesn't." "You don't know that." "I do." Wade's voice was firm. "Because I've watched you mother this entire ranch. Mother that garden. Hell, mother me when I'm being stubborn about seeing the doctor or eating properly. Being a mother isn't about biology. It's about caring for things, making them grow. You do that every day." Clara felt tears burn her eyes. "That's not the same." "Maybe not, but it's not less either." They sat together in the garden, both covered in dirt, both scarred by losses that would never fully heal. "If we have children, we have children," Wade said quietly. "If we don't, we don't. Either way, we have this. We have each other, and we have a life we're building together. That's enough." "Is it?" "For me, it is." Wade looked at her directly. "Is it for you?" Clara thought about the question, really thought about it. A year ago, the answer would have been no. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have even considered the question. But now, sitting in a garden she'd restored with her own hands, on a ranch she was learning to call home, married to a man who saw her clearly and chose her anyway? "Yeah," she said softly. "It's enough." The first snow came in November, earlier than Wade had expected. They spent 3 days moving the herd to winter pasture, securing buildings, stocking supplies. Clara had never experienced a frontier winter. Wade warned her it would be brutal. He wasn't exaggerating. By December, Black Hollow was buried under snow that made travel nearly impossible. The ranch became an isolated world, just Clara, Wade, and the 3 hands who stayed through winter. They worked from dawn to dusk, keeping animals alive, keeping themselves fed, keeping the cold from killing everything they'd built. It was the hardest thing Clara had ever done. But she didn't run. On Christmas Eve, Clara made a simple dinner from their dwindling stores. She and Wade ate alone in the kitchen while wind howled outside. "First Christmas here," Wade observed. "First Christmas anywhere in years." Clara had spent the last 5 avoiding holidays entirely. Too many memories. "You thinking about her?" Clara knew he meant her daughter. "Always, but especially today." Wade reached across the table and took her hand. "Tell me about her." So Clara did. Talked about a 4-year-old girl with dark hair and a laugh that sounded like bells. Talked about the fever that had taken her, about the husband who'd blamed Clara, about the years of drifting that had followed. Wade listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything, just listened. When Clara finished, her face was wet with tears. She hadn't known she was crying. "She was lucky," Wade said quietly, "to have a mother who loved her that much. She died. But she was loved, completely. That's not nothing. Clara squeezed his hand. Thank you. They sat in the lamplight, holding hands across the table, two damaged people who'd somehow found each other in the middle of nowhere. I love you, Clara said suddenly. The words surprised her as much as they surprised Wade. Wade's expression shifted, something between shock and relief and joy. I love you too, he said. Have for a while now. Was starting to think you'd never say it. I was afraid to. I know. I'm still afraid. I know that too. Wade stood and moved around the table, pulling her up into his arms. But you said it anyway. That's what matters. Clara buried her face in his chest. What if I'm bad at this? At being a wife? At loving someone? Then you'll be bad at it honestly, Wade said against her hair, and we'll figure it out together. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, they held each other and listened to it rage. Winter didn't break them. That was something. Spring came slowly, revealing a landscape transformed by months of snow and ice. Clara walked through the garden in early March and found green shoots pushing through dead leaves, plants she'd thought were lost, surviving against odds. The ranch had survived too. Lost some cattle to the harsh weather, but not as many as they'd feared. The hands who'd stayed proved their worth. The buildings held, and Clara had stayed. That felt like its own kind of miracle. In April, Martha rode out with news that Hendricks was selling his ranch and moving to Denver. The fight had cost him too. Respect, alliances, the political power he'd spent years building. Town's better off without him, Martha said, though I imagine he'll tell people in Denver some story about how Black Hollow was too small for his ambitions. Let him, Clara said. Doesn't matter what he says if we know the truth. Martha smiled. You sound like you belong here now. Maybe I do. After Martha left, Clara stood in the garden, fully restored now, thriving with the first growth of spring, and thought about belonging. She'd spent 5 years believing she didn't belong anywhere, that she was too broken, too damaged, too cursed to put down roots. But here she was, rooted, growing, not fixed. She'd never be fixed. The scars from losing her daughter would never fully heal. The years of drifting would always be part of her story. But she was no longer defined by those scars, no longer running from them. She was building something new instead. Wade found her there at sunset, which had become their habit. He'd work all day, she'd work all day, and they'd meet in the garden to talk about everything and nothing while the sky turned colors that had no names. Heard about Hendricks, he said. Martha told me. How do you feel? Clara considered. Like we won something I didn't know we were fighting for. And what's that? The right to just exist, without permission, without apology. Clara leaned into him. The right to be broken and still worth choosing. Wade wrapped his arm around her shoulders. We are worth choosing, both of us. They stood watching the sunset paint the ranch in gold and orange, turning ordinary things beautiful. You know what I realized? Clara said. What? That day you chose me outside the trading post. I thought you were crazy. Thought you'd made the worst decision of your life. And now? Now I think you made the only decision that mattered. Clara turned to face him. Because you didn't choose someone who looked good on paper. You chose someone real, someone complicated, someone who was honest enough to tell you she was planning to leave. And you chose to stay. I chose to try, Clara corrected. Still choosing it, every day. That's all anyone can do. They kissed as the sun dropped below the horizon, painting their shadows long across the garden Clara had restored, on the ranch they were building together, in the life they'd chosen when everyone had told them to choose something easier. 2 years later, Clara stood in that same garden, watching her hands, calloused now, strong from work, plant seeds for the summer harvest. The garden had become famous in the territory. People rode out from town just to see what Clara Mercer had built from ruins. She'd started teaching other women how to garden in harsh frontier conditions, had started selling surplus vegetables in town, had started, very slowly, becoming part of the community she'd once planned to leave. The ranch was doing well, not rich, but stable, growing. Wade had hired 2 more hands permanently. They'd bought breeding stock, were planning to expand into the north pasture next spring. Clara heard horses and looked up to see Wade riding in with Jack, both of them laughing about something. Wade's laugh had come back slowly over the past 2 years. It still surprised her sometimes, The sound of joy from a man who'd forgotten how to feel it. He saw her in the garden and waved. She waved back. This was her life now. This ranch, this garden, this man, this community that had finally accepted her not because she'd changed, but because she'd proved she wasn't going anywhere. People still talked about the day Wade Mercer had chosen the oldest, poorest woman at the end of the line. Still debated why he'd done it. But Clara knew the answer. He'd seen her. Really seen her. Not who she'd been or who she could become, but who she was in that exact moment. Broken, honest, and done pretending. And he'd chosen her anyway. That choice had changed everything. Not because it fixed them. Neither of them would ever be fixed, not really, but because it proved that broken things could still fit together. Could still build something worth having. Clara went back to planting, her hands sure and steady in the soil, surrounded by the garden she'd restored and the life she'd built and the future